How many jobs did Jobkeeper keep? And was it worth it? Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.Heise here, and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Grab your stein of coffee, because the RBA have released a research paper today asking the question, how many jobs did Jobkeeper keep? So, how many do you think they kept? And we'll go through parts of this report, and I'll link to it if you want to go through it yourself, or you can find it in the RBA website. But let's just have a read through this abstract, and we'll do some rough numbers. The Jobkeeper payment is a wage subsidy to help firms affected by COVID-19 retain their staff. Now, I had a neighbor who got this. He didn't need it. He was a subcontractor. I know of other people that have gotten it, taking advantage of it. You can't blame people if the government is giving away money like this, taking advantage of the situation. Because if they don't, and their competitor does, then they'll be at a competitive disadvantage. So everyone needs to take this if it's there. But that doesn't mean everyone who took it needed it. So we examined the extent to which Jobkeeper cushioned employment loss in the first 4 months of the program. To do this, we used worker-level data from the Labour Force Survey and an identification strategy that exploits a threshold in eligibility to infer causality. We find that 1 in 5 employees who received Jobkeeper and thus remained employed would not have remained employed during this period had it not been for the Jobkeeper payment. So 1 in 5. But what that means, and I'll have a shot of coffee, is that 4 out of 5 would have remained, who got Jobkeeper, would have still remained employed. So is that a pretty good efficiency rate? What do you reckon? Let me know in the comments, and I'm going to have a shot of this. I mean, well, it is a government program, so it's probably pretty good. 20% success rate. So, given that 3.5 million individuals were receiving the payment over the period from April to July 2020, this implies that Jobkeeper reduced the total employment losses by at least 700,000 over the same period. We discussed the potential sources of bias that might affect our results, some of which stem from the fact that our conclusions are based on the sample of casual employees who may have responded differently to Jobkeeper than other workers. Our paper does not consider the long-running effects of Jobkeeper on employment or the indirect channels through which Jobkeeper may affect employment. So it's just the overall. And what we'll have a look here. Okay, here's the largest single measure was the 101.3 billion wage Jobkeeper payment. So let's have a look at that. They're saying 700,000 jobs were saved, or sorry, kept. 700 jobs were kept. So let's jump over to Excel and have a look at this. Now, I've got 70 billion here because that's the cost of the first phase. The 101 billion, which they mentioned in the intro, is for the entire program. Now, 700,000 jobs. We divide the 70 billion by the 700,000 jobs they've saved. That's a cost of $100,000 per job. Pretty penny. Now, what's the yearly wage? Now, the average wage of private sector workers about over a year is 92 grand, give or take. And that, remember, that's skewed because of the high income earners, so people on this program may be lower. But let's just use this for this argument. So you have people pulling in 92 grand. They're paying about 21,000 with loose change for tax, as you can see here, per year. So it's going to take them 4.5 years of work to pay back the cost of this Jobkeeper. 4.5 years. Was it worth it? Was this $70 billion worth it? And remember, they've already also deployed another $30 billion on top of it. That's the question, guys. Just something to keep in mind. So let's jump back and have a look at this. The COVID-19 outbreak in Australia in early 2020 led to a sharp fall in economic activity. Well, no, the lockdown introduced by the government in response to the COVID-19 outbreak led to a sharp fall in economic activity. Do people not realize? Do they not know? It's a subtle difference. But if you keep repeating this, people will believe it. In response, the Australian government announced a series of measures to support incomes and employment. The single largest measure was the $101.3 billion wage subsidy scheme called the Jobkeeper payment, As the name implies, a key objective of the Jobkeeper payment was to preserve the connections between employers and their employees during the crisis, and to support business and job survival. It did this by giving employers a wage subsidy for eligible employees in order to help them retain those employees and reduce the associated wage costs. Another objective of Jobkeeper was to provide income support. In the initial 6-month stage of the program between March to September, which is the focus of the paper, the subsidy was paid at a flat $1,500 per fortnight per eligible employee. Sorry everyone, I got a cold when I went to the beach. The Jobkeeper payment is one of the largest labour market interventions in Australia's history. In its first 6 months, it supported around 3.5 million workers in more than 900,000 businesses, and undoubtedly played a crucial role in cushioning the decline in employment and incomes for the first half of 2020. The Treasury's 3-month review of the program used descriptive evidence to make the assessment that Jobkeeper has had a material effect. To date, however, no study has estimated the causal effect of the subsidy on employment using an approach that accounts for the differences between workers who received Jobkeeper and those who did not. For this reason, the effect of Jobkeeper on employment remains an open question. Our paper helps to fill this gap in the evidence-based. Specifically, we seek to address the following question: what effect did Jobkeeper have on employment during the first 4 months of the program? In doing so, we provide the first quantitative estimates of the causal effect of Jobkeeper on employment, which build on the descriptive evidence discussed by Treasury. Our goal is to estimate the counterfactual, that is, how much employment would have fallen in the absence of Jobkeeper. We find that 1 in every 5 employees who receive Jobkeeper would have exited employment had it not been for the wage subsidy. Scaling our estimates to the aggregate level suggested that Jobkeeper reduced overall employment losses by at least $700,000 during the 700,000 people during its first 4 months. While our error bands are wide and our analysis has a number of important caveats, our findings are close to Treasury's ex post and ex ante estimates of the numbers of jobs that the program saved. To identify the causal effect of Jobkeeper on employment, we make use of strict thresholds in the eligibility criteria for the program. We compare the employment outcomes of casual employees who have a little less than 12 months of tenure with their employer in March, who narrowly missed out on being eligible for Jobkeeper, to that of casuals with little more than 12 months of tenure who were eligible. Because our approach focused on casual employees in a narrow range of tenure, these two groups should be similar in terms of their observable and unobservable characteristics. As such, any differences between these groups that emerged after the introduction of Jobkeeper can be attributed to the effects of the program rather than other factors, such as the uneven effect of COVID-19 across industries. To implement this approach, we used individual level data from the Labour Force Survey and a difference in difference strategy. So we can see here, this is the employment, this is the actual, and this is the counterfactual, Bishop and Day, and this is the counterfactual Treasury down there. So that's the number of jobs they're suspecting is being saved. But look at that band there, guys. So 95% confidence intervals in this shaded area. Our findings have implications for policy. First, a better understanding of the effects of Jobkeeper on employment can provide additional guidance to policymakers on the benefits of extending or costs of withdrawing the scheme. While we do not perform a cost-benefit analysis, I've got another paper I want to go through, which is looking at a scientific approach to dealing with COVID. Why aren't cost-benefit analysis done for any of these things, any of these government policy decisions? Maybe it's my naivete. I thought you'd have our leaders there, you'd have the experts would provide advice to them, they'd get economics and statisticians and finance analysts to do a cost-benefit analysis of the recommendations, and then our leaders would make the call. And then you would hope that that information would all be presented to the public. When's the last time you've seen a cost-benefit analysis for a government intervention in the economy? You think that should just be a hard-coded requirement of any decision? It really should. Maybe I'm just expecting too much. So, while we do not perform a cost-benefit analysis, our results would be an important consideration in such an analysis. Second, our results will be useful for forecasters grappling with the question of whether the withdrawal of existing support measures in late 2020 and early 2021 will have implications for labour market outcomes and economic growth. For example, it may be reasonable to assume that the number of jobs saved by the introduction of Jobkeeper provides an upper bound on the number of jobs that will be lost once the program ends. In saying that, any such employment losses could be offset by an underlying recovery in economic activity or further policy stimulus. It is reasonable to think that the effects of Jobkeeper on employment will vary with the state of the labour market and could plausibly be much lower by the time the scheme ends. Finally, as Treasury have noted, a better understanding of the effects of Jobkeeper can aid policymakers in the event of further economic shocks. Throughout this paper, we pay close attention to the assumptions that underpin our results. There are two that are worth emphasizing up front, because we were not able to test them in a rigorous way. The first of these key assumptions is that Jobkeeper did not have spillover effects on workers who did not receive it, either at a firm level, for example, though its general support of firm profitability, or at an aggregate level via general equilibrium effects, for example, through its effect of supporting the overall strength of the economy. If this assumption does not hold, we may have either overstated or understated the effect of Jobkeeper on employment, depending on the nature of the spillover. The second key assumption is that the effects we estimate for casuals with limited job tenure can generalize to other Jobkeeper recipients. That is, we assume that Jobkeeper had similar effects on employment outcomes for casual employees as for permanent ones, notwithstanding that these employment relationships differ in a range of ways, as do the characteristics of the firms and workers who use them. It is important to note that our analysis is entirely retrospective. Our focus is on how Jobkeeper supported employment in the first few months of the program. We do not consider the effects of Jobkeeper from August 2020 onwards. Notably, the changes in payment rate and eligibility that occurred from the end of September mean that our estimates may not generalize beyond our period of analysis. Treasury has noted that Jobkeeper has a number of features that create adverse incentives which may become more pronounced over time as the economy recovers. An important policy question is whether Jobkeeper was effective in alleviating the longer-running effects of labour market scarring. That is the important question. We do not consider We do not consider this question in our paper. Well, you need to do another paper, guys. Come on, Lo, get the whip out, get the lads working on that one. Because that's probably more important than keeping jobs now, is mitigating the long-term effects of labour market scarring. And that's when people lose their jobs and they find it really hard to get back in. And that gets harder the older you get. Even once the data become available, analysing these long-run effects will be a more complicated task, given the broader range of competing forces at play. An important avenue for further research will be to study the longer-term benefits and costs of the program on employment, earnings, and productivity. Another aspect of Jobkeeper that our study does not consider explicitly is the role the program played in supporting incomes of firms and workers, which was one of its main objectives. As noted above, our analysis is also silent on the various indirect channels through which Jobkeeper may have affected economic outcomes and employment in the first few months of the program, such as via second-round effects on aggregate demand. By focusing on the direct employment effects alone, our analysis provides a partial, albeit important, evaluation of the scheme. The remainder of this paper is structured as follows. Section 2 provides some background on the Jobkeeper payment. Section 3 briefly discusses the existing evidence on Jobkeeper and previous work on wage subsidy schemes. The data and empirical strategies are described in Section 4 and 5. 6 and 7 present the results and robustness tests. Section 8 provides our assessment of the short-run effects of Jobkeeper, and Section 9 provides some concluding remarks. So what I'm going to do is, guys, I'm going to jump straight back to section 8, their assessment of the short run effects, and then we'll look at their concluding remarks. I will link to this if you'd like to go through the rest of it. The assessment, the aggregate effects. Our baseline estimate is that receiving Jobkeeper increased an employee's probability of remaining employed by about 20 percentage points. We can thus estimate the aggregate effect of the wage subsidy on employment by multiplying this estimate, 0.2, by the number of people on Jobkeeper during our period of analysis, around 3.5. This back of the envelope calculation, or Excel quick job, suggests that Jobkeeper reduced the aggregate fall in employment over the first half of 2020 by at least 700,000. To put this estimate into perspective, the actual fall in employment over the first half of 2020 was 650,000. As such, our estimates imply that overall employment losses would have been twice as large over this period without Jobkeeper. Our estimate of the no Jobkeeper counterfactual, which subtracts our estimate of the employment saved by Jobkeeper from the actual level of employment, was shown in Figure 1, along with its 95% confidence interval. Our estimate is similar to Treasury's initial estimate that the unemployment rate would be around 5 percentage points higher in the absence of Jobkeeper. A 5 percentage point reduction in the unemployment rate equates to at least 700,000 fewer people leaving employment. Our estimate is a little larger than Treasury's more recent estimate in the July Economic and Fiscal Update that all of the fiscal stimulus has prevented the loss of around 700,000 jobs. The latter estimate also includes support measures other than Jobkeeper, such as cash payments to households, income support, and investment incentives for businesses, loan guarantees, and regulatory measures. So it could be interpreted as an upper bound estimate of Jobkeeper's effect. We have characterized our estimate of the aggregate effect as being at least 700,000, rather than around 700,000 for a few reasons. First, our baseline estimates for May, June, and July are 696,000, 1,002,000, and 839,000 respectively. Secondly, Jobkeeper is likely to have had positive second-round effects on employment by supporting income. Our approach does not capture these general equilibrium effects. In saying that, we cannot rule out the possibility that we have overestimated the aggregate effects of Jobkeeper on employment. For instance, if the employment effects were smaller for permanent employees than for casuals, or if our estimates are biased upwards for reasons discussed in section 7.2. So cost per relationship saved. So, the first phase of Jobkeeper provided $70 billion in support over a 6-month period. If we combine this with our estimate of the effect of the program on employment, and we assume that the effects are estimated for April to July were similar in August and September, it suggests that each employer-employee relationship saved by Jobkeeper cost $100,000 over this 6-month period. This simple measure of the cost effectiveness of Jobkeeper appears to compare favorably to similar programs in other countries, such as the PPP in the US, which has an estimated cost per job saved of $224,000. This may reflect that the Jobkeeper scheme was more tightly targeted than the PPP. However, there are several differences between Jobkeeper and the PPP that make comparison difficult. See Table A1 in Hamilton for a summary of these differences. In particular, the Jobkeeper funds were dispensed to firms reasonably uniformly over a 6-month period. In contrast, PPP funds were provided to firms upfront as a forgivable loan, and firms have some discretion over how quickly to dispense the funds to payroll over time, which means the duration of PPP is less clear. While this makes it harder to adjust the cost per job save matrix for differences in program duration, this adjustment would likely tilt the comparison more strongly in favor of Jobkeeper. This is because funds appear to be less front-loaded under Jobkeeper than under PPP. However, any cost-benefit analysis of Jobkeeper is well beyond the scope of our paper. We leave that analysis for researchers and analysts with expertise in that area. So, casual versus permanent workers. A key assumption behind our estimates of the aggregate effects of Jobkeeper is that the treatment effects we estimate for casuals with 6 to 23 months tenure can generalize to other Jobkeeper recipients. Our treatment effects estimates represent local treatment effects around the tenure eligibility threshold. It is possible that Jobkeeper had a different effect on casuals away from the tenure threshold. For example, longer tenure casuals, we say with more than 2 years of tenure, are likely to have accumulated more firm-specific human capital on average than shorter tenure colleagues, and thus may have been less likely to lose their jobs in the absence of Jobkeeper. In this case, our estimates of the aggregate effect of Jobkeeper would be overstated, all else being equal. Whether our treatment effects estimates can generalize to permanent employees is even more uncertain. In a casual employment relationship, an employee does not have guaranteed hours of work, and the relationship can be ended without notice. In a permanent relationship, an employee has an advance commitment from their employer about hours of work and length of service, and are generally entitled to notice before termination. Unlike permanent employees, casual employees are also generally not entitled to paid annual sick leave from their employer. Whether the employment outcomes of permanent employees responded differently to casual employees to receiving Jobkeeper is a priori unclear. On the one hand, the higher firing costs associated with permanent employees relative to casual work may have meant that permanent employees on Jobkeeper were less likely to be dismissed in the absence of the program. In that case, our estimates would overstate the effects of Jobkeeper on aggregate employment. However, we provide evidence in Appendix D suggesting that firing costs, specifically redundancy payments, had no discernible effect on employment outcomes during the initial months of the COVID-19 crisis. Employment of permanent workers may also have responded less than casuals to Jobkeeper in view of the fact that $1,500 fortnight payment represents a larger fraction of average pre-scheme earnings for casual workers than for permanent workers, a higher replacement rate, reflecting the lower average pre-scheme earnings of casual employees. On the other hand, the temporary changes to the Fair Work Act 2009 to provide firms with more flexibility to modify employees' working arrangements may have had a larger employment-preserving effect on permanent staff than casuals. As discussed earlier, these changes meant that an employee could by Jobkeeper, could have their hours reduced or be reemployed at their employer's discretion. This flexibility was already a feature of most casual arrangements, but not permanent ones. As such, the Jobkeeper program, broadly defined to include both the subsidy and the flexibility provisions, may have had a larger effect on employment of permanent workers than casuals. Teasing out the separate effects of the wage subsidy and the flexibility provisions is an avenue for further work. While our main identification strategy is restricted to casual employees, our alternative strategy, based on the residency requirements, captures the effect of Jobkeeper on both casual and permanent employees. Using this alternative approach, we can perform a test of the hypothesis of constant treatment effects across casual and permanent employees. We do not reject the hypothesis of equal treatment effects across groups at conventional levels of significance. While this suggests that the assumption of equal treatment effects across casual and permanent employees may be reasonable, this test suffers from low power due to small sample size. Our approach to inferring aggregate effects also generalizes our treatment effects estimates to non-employees. Under Jobkeeper, self-employed people could receive $1,500 payment as a business participant if they were an eligible sole trader, partner, beneficiary of a trust, or were actively engaged in an eligible entity as a shareholder or director. In this situation, eligibility was based on the firm eligibility test and some other criteria. Non-employing businesses made up around 11% of all individual Jobkeeper recipients in April. By extrapolating our treatment effects estimates from Section 6.2 to the self-employed, we are implicitly assuming that 1/5 of all self-employed Jobkeeper recipients would have exited employment in the absence of Jobkeeper. We cannot test this assumption directly, so we can leave it as a caveat and avenue for further research. So the conclusion. We find that Jobkeeper played an important role in cushioning the decline in employment over the first half of 2020. A baseline estimate is that 1 in 5 Jobkeeper recipients would not have stayed employed during this period had it not been for Jobkeeper. At the aggregate level, this implies Jobkeeper prevented at least 700,000 additional employment relationships being lost in the short term. Overall, employment losses would have been twice as large over the first half of 2020 without Jobkeeper. We have emphasized several important assumptions underlying our estimates. These assumptions should be kept in mind, and further work using administrative data sources should be undertaken to confirm our results. Our analysis is retrospective and short-term in focus. We examine the extent to which Jobkeeper supported employment in the first 4 months of the program. We do not consider the employment effects from August onward, Jobkeeper 2, or the effectiveness of the program in alleviating the long-running effects of labour market scarring. Policymakers should not assume that the short-term effects of the scheme will necessarily persist. Indeed, the international literature suggests that wage subsidies, if maintained too long, can have adverse effects on incentives and impede the reallocation of labour. A key objective of Jobkeeper was to provide income support to business owners and their workers. We do not study this important aspect. Our analysis is also silent on the various indirect channels through which Jobkeeper may have affected economic outcomes, as such, via second-round demand effects. These general equilibrium effects are not captured in our estimates. By focusing on the direct employment effects alone, our analysis provides a partial, albeit important, evaluation of the scheme. So there we have it, everyone. There we have it. Jobkeeper has kept 700,000 jobs at a significant cost per job. Do you think it's worth it? And do you think, well, they'll be able to peter it off? What do you reckon? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you're a fan and want to support the content I create here, there are a few ways you can. You can join us on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us using our affiliate links at Amazon, eBay, Independent Reserve, or AussieBroadband. You can buy merch from HeiseSays or Teespring. You can support us using Gold Pass from the Perth Mint or via PayPal. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.